Hi everyone, welcome to Kembali 2020, a rebuilt Bali festival, a digital program designed to inspire, excite, reconnect, and revitalize the Balinese and Indonesian community. It goes from October 29 to November 8, 2020. Kembali is the Indonesian word for return or comeback. Represents revitalization in the face of global challenges. The festival will unite people in Bali and Indonesia together with an international audience at a time when travel is largely impossible. And creating connection is more important than ever before. Today, we will present you with a veteran Australian journalist, Deborah Cassrels, and we are going to discuss about her new books, Gods and Demons. It is published by the ABC, and just released. Probably the Indonesian reader won't get the copy of this book until next year's. And what I love about this book, it's 339 pages, I believe. What I love about this book is the way Deborah, the way the stories in the book unfolded, how the accounts of Deborah's personal life merge seamlessly with the accounts of events and individuals that she met in her professional capacity as a journalist. It is both a very touching memoir as well as a very powerful journalistic tour de force. So I would like to ask Deborah, can you tell me the thinking process that leads into the creation of Gods and Demons?
Thank you, June, and thank you for having me. Well, after meticulously keeping myself out of stories for my entire career, the first rule when I was a cadet, it was quite difficult to write in the memoir genre. It just went against the grain, and my book editors kept reminding me to be more personal. So it's a chronological narrative, and it was lucky that I'd kept all my diaries and notebooks, tapes, and photos since I arrived in Indonesia in, well, before 2009, but I started my career there, my Indonesia career there in 2009. My journalism was archived, but I had to rely on my memory to fill in the dots, which is where my personal collections were invaluable. And well, I think we all know memory can play dreadful tricks.
Yeah, true.
And so my agent initially suggested I write this book some years ago, but I didn't really have enough material. And I was also too busy chasing compelling pieces on such things as terrorism and trafficking and offbeat topics that took me throughout Indonesia for weeks at a time. I didn't want to sit at a desk all day and write this book. So the book remained on the back burner till about 2018. Eventually, I'd gathered sufficient material worthy of a book, and it made sense to write about some of the most captivating stories I'd covered. And it also capped a decade of my correspondence from Indonesia.
Can you elaborate more? I mean, the first part about how I'm a trained journalist also, and I know it's very hard. We are trained not to get involved personally in the story, so I believe that's one of the most difficult challenge in writing a memoir for a journalist. How did you overcome that kind of challenge?
Well, probably with a lot of support and help from those editors who would, you know, give send me notes about can you explain
this?
and what actually happened to you personally, and you know, so it was sort of reminders to, in some of the subjects more than others, what was your personal experience in this particular story, you know, and it was very difficult to keep remembering to keep myself in the story and say I did this.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, this is the deep training of us as a journalist is just never put yourself in the story. So I was always absolutely meticulous to keep myself out of it. Yeah, and
so, how many volumes of diary you have with you? I mean that for an Indonesian journalist,
yeah.
we don't have the tradition of keeping a diary.
Well, look, I had so many. I would have an annual diary, and then I would have a large one and a small one. A large one to keep at the desk, and then a small one. And I also had millions of notebooks that I jotted things down at my desk. And I actually never threw anything out because I just in case someone came back and wanted to sue me for something. So
yeah, well, that's true. But
no, I mean, it was you know, rock solid evidence that I had not misquoted people, or you know, and specifically, yeah, the tapes. So I mean, I was just so pleased because I kept thinking I should. It's just so much rubbish, you know. I had boxes and boxes of stuff that I didn't know what to do with, and then when the book began, you know, I thought, thank God I didn't throw all the stuff out.
and did these notes, all diaries, help you in? I believe that there were 2 episodes mentioned in the book when some 2 individuals file a complaint about you being an unethical journalist and sort.
Yeah.
Does these records help you in any way?
Well, in that I would have emails, of course, that would have come to me to alert me to from the news desk in Sydney. They sent me emails to let me know that someone had complained. So I would have, as far as that, I would have that on record. But yeah, a lot of the time, just checking dates was incredibly helpful with the diaries, because I certainly went back and used them a lot. As I said, I had the stories; they were all archived in the diary, in the library at News Limited. So if I needed to get hold of a story, that wasn't a problem. But in between those times, you know, I would sometimes, yeah, I would think, well, when did such and such happen? Where did I go on? You know, and I could actually pinpoint in the book exact times and days in the end, which I loved.
Yeah.
You know. And the other thing I found really invaluable was the photographs that I'd taken, because they had given me a news camera because they didn't want to. You know, it was cheaper for me to take photos which were published. You know, and they were, so I was able to get hold of a really good camera, and I just went everywhere with it, and I took millions of photos. Because I never really knew, I wasn't a professional photographer, I never really knew if you know, a lot of them would be flops. So so I took so many, but yeah, sometimes I would I would, while I was writing the book, I would have this vivid memory of what somebody looked like and what that person might be wearing and what was in the background. And I would try to describe that in the book. And I'd think, well, I know I've got a photo of that. And then I'd go back and I'd find it was totally wrong.
Memory is fickle, you know.
Yeah. So
and it's good. It's good to have a photograph with the timestamps.
Yeah, exactly. Because they also had dates on them.
but the reason I asked you about how many volumes of diary you kept is because after reading the book, I believe you are very brutal in selecting which event or which individual, which phenomenon that made into the final published form of the book. So I would like to ask you, how many interesting things that didn't make to the end?
Quite a lot, yeah, because I mean, because I was there for a decade, or I mean, reporting, and it is quite difficult to be selective, and sort of whittle it down. Although, as a journalist, I was very used to editing my own copy, been doing it for years, and actually, I've been a journalist since I was out of university. So I started at 17, and first to the New Zealand Herald. Well, this is a bit of a history, and I think that's all I've ever done. So you just build up. So during my career, I've done probably worked across a lot of sections, and I've been a sub-editor. I would often, while I was a feature writer, I'd be editing as well. So, I was very used to doing my own editing and working alone in Bali without a news, without anybody. I mean, I was very much on my own. So I really, it was quite invaluable to have that skill to edit and be able to sort of see, to be able to sort of cut back stuff when it was over length.
But I want to know.
You're right. I think initially there were a couple of chapters that I wrote that I actually threw out, and I think it was because I realized they were more like other people's personal experiences rather than my own, and it was, there were a lot of interesting things that didn't make it, simply because it was going in a different direction. The history of Bali in particular, I mean, you could go into that for several chapters, and I had to kind of stop myself doing that because there's been so much, I suppose, already written in that vein as well. Yeah.
And I would like to explore this part, Deborah. As a journalist, I myself realized that we met hundreds of people throughout our careers. What I really admire about you is in the book, you have managed to establish what I call a long haul relationship with scores of your sources, transforming that relationship not as merely a professional's relationship, but a human, empathetic, fruitful, meaningful friendship, like with Vicky Sukats, the mother of one of the Bali Nine, and that Pakistani Hazara refugee,
Yes.
who stranded in Bogor and then built a school for the refugee children before being relocated to the New Zealand. You
Yeah.
kept track of them, so you met them, and throughout the years, a blooming
Yeah.
friendships.
That's
How
great.
how did you do that? And does it affect you as a human being? I mean,
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, June. I think and I was wondering, about it myself. And I think it probably began years ago through feature writing, actually, because not so much news reports, because with a news report, it's very ephemeral. It's very, and with the feature writing, I often wrote even, years ago, I think actually even in my first job on the New Zealand Herald, I took a real liking to writing features rather than news, although I did both. And then just through the years, when I've done a lot of quite sensitive features on medical issues, perhaps I did, even children with cancer, people doing IVF stories. This is in Australia, and they were big stories. And I started to really get into the lives of these people who, were very vulnerable. So they, to talk to me, you needed to be, establish a relationship, actually, because they just weren't going to talk to you if there wasn't that empathy there, and in fact, it wasn't that I became, in these stories extremely, fascinated and interested in their journeys. And also they were, a lot of the time very sad journeys. So, and I found that I started with those, the tougher stories. I particularly started to develop these very enduring relationships, often with, and it kind of started a long time ago, I think. And I kept up with a lot of those people. A lot of them have, in my past years ago, a lot of them I don't, I have, the relationship is not there. Well, I haven't seen or heard from them for ages, but certainly in my Indonesian, with my Indonesian sources, and they've become real relationships, a lot of them, and certainly I would say the same theme runs through that, in that they are basically, the relationships come out of the tougher stories, more or journeys that they've taken. And I think it was just, you have to have an interest in these journeys that they take to and certainly with Vicky, as you said, I found her just sort of this admirable character who had this sense of humor, even though she had such a hard life, even without her son being in jail. Her life is difficult, and she's always kind of cheerful, and she's sort of so yeah, we would when she came over, I'd take her, we'd go out for dinner, we would and she would find that very therapeutic, because we would just laugh and be as two friends, really. And she felt she could be open with me as well. Yeah, I think as a story like that, sort of, or the tough stories, they develop this understanding, this affinity unfolds. And the people involved are kind of, they're tenacious, and they're muddling through this thing as best they can. And their stories are special, and they share these quite intimate details of their lives. And then they get, you know, then obviously they sort of get to know me as a friend. And I think well, there was one refugee, I mean, a lot of the refugees I do keep in touch with, well, several anyway. And so there's another one who I've known really since I've started doing these refugee stories in Jakarta. And
the Iranian couples.
The Iranian couple, that's right, yeah. And he, Muhammad, his name is, and he started picking me up at the airport in Jakarta every time I came over. And he had this, I think you probably read, he had this funny little Mr. Bean car. It was tiny and no aircon or anything, but it was just sort of so really nice to be greeted like that. No one picks you up anymore. And yeah, he used to call me sister. So that was really like a Rastafarian type of thing.
And they check whether you list them on your phone as refugee or as
Yes, that's right. And I sort of cringed because I thought, I know she's going to ask that, and at the time, and and I think there was just a big silence, you know, because I actually did, because I have a lot of Muhammads in my phone. It's a very common name, in, you know, refugee name, and yeah, but I think and just recently, the other day, I caught up with because it was the anniversary of the 2002 Bali bombing on the 12th of October. So I caught up with the Australian father of a young woman who was killed in the bombings, and his name is Dari, and I think he's also in the book. And we became friends during years of interviews. Every year he would come over with his second wife, and yeah, he again, you know, was one of these people who was very open and revealed such intimate things about his emotions, and I just couldn't help feeling sort of so sad for him, and it was sort of, we had a kind of simpatico, I suppose, and anyway, this year, no one was traveling to Bali, he came to the Sydney Memorial and for the first time, and I also went there. I kind of thought he might go. He said he might go, but I didn't know. But we met up there, so just a few days ago, and it was kind of strange because it's and ironic because we met up on Australian soil for the first time, you know. And even though he lives in Australia and I'm back in Australia, I'd never met him outside of Bali. So, but yeah, that certainly that is a long-standing friendship for sure. We are really good friends now. Yeah. So.
And all these long-standing friendships, how does it impact you as a human being? Because in the early part of the book, you are basically feeling lonely, isolated, and so on. So
yeah, I think that's true, and I think they actually became, especially in Indonesia. Yes, these people became my friends in place of. I found a lot of I was a bit of an outsider in Bali because I was, you know, a lone journalist working from Seminac, and and you know, people would come and go from other Western journalists, but you know, they were very transient. So so I think and the sort of journalists that were in around Seminat would be lifestyle journalists, and I didn't really have anything in common with those people. And probably, look, I hung around the Bali journos more than anybody. You know, I would be, but certainly, as you say, those sources who became friends were really more friends, especially as they were living in Indonesia. You know, so every time I went to Jakarta, I would get together with them. You know, and yeah, particularly you know, this guy Muhammad who I was talking about. We drove all over West Java together, and you know, he took me to masses and masses of refugee places where they were all staying, and I would never have sort of accessed those places without him. And he introduced me to his whole sort of, well, his circles that he knew, and he was quite influential in a sense, because he was running some sort of Christian service as well, and so he was delivering aid to people, you know. So he and his, you know, the whole family then became friends. So his wife and had a little boy, and yeah, it was great. So yeah, that probably did compensate a lot for those relationships, for being a bit of an outsider there.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that the friendships born out of empathy, and I think empathy is a two-way street. But this word, empathy, I believe, is the common recurring theme in this book. And then one particular story that really moved me to tears is how you empathize with this Japanese boy who had to face trials on cannabis possession alone without his parents. Could you recollect on this particular event?
Yeah, it was extraordinary, really. I was at court, at the Denpasar District Court, and I was covering a different court story. I was just passing a holding cell, and I saw him sitting there with a couple of other people, and he looked very out of place because he was very neatly dressed, and he, you know, you could see he was just a kid. And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And he sort of he was very open. He said, "Oh, it's such a drag. I got busted with this joint," and I said, "Well," and he said, "I've been in jail for a couple of months," and at that time I knew there were a lot of kids. There was being targeted by the police, particularly people whose parents maybe had money, who could, you know, pay to get their children out of jail. But I just said to him, "Where are your parents?" You know, he "Oh no, they couldn't come. They couldn't. They would lose faith over this." And yeah, it was extremely sad. So he had no support at all. He was there by himself, and I just talked to him. He said, I think I really hope that I've had my birthday here. It was such a drag, and I hope I'm out by New Year." And he didn't get released till February. So he was in there for about 6 months. And I watched him when he went into the courtroom, and he represented himself, and he spoke fluent Bahasa Indonesia. And I thought he was just and he was so respectful, and I just thought, this is amazing. Exactly a year ago, there was this whole kerfuffle about the Australian Barley Boy who was arrested and there was outrage because he was, he couldn't go to jail because he was a juvenile, and he was this boy in the same position. And as I said in my story, he wasn't called the Barley Boy. he was just not even, no one knew about him, I mean, I was the only person that wrote about him, actually. I did write a piece at the time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the story even escaped the local news cycles.
Yeah, and yeah, so it was something that really struck me as being very sad, because his mother lived in Bali and his father was in Tokyo, so they'd obviously separated, but neither of them. I thought at least the mother, who was in Bali, could come, and but he said, I totally understand, which was, he was very, as you say, said, he was stoic and he was mature, and yet he was just a kid, he shouldn't have. And then actually he was deported, of course, when he got out. So I'm not really sure he would have gone back to Japan. Yeah.
Yeah. And this boy is one of several real peoples that appear in your book, which I believe contribute to the strength of the book. Because sometimes when we talk about big issues, environmental issues,
Yes.
we often get lost into big data, big statistics, and forget that all these issues have real impact on real person. I particularly love the gold diggers, the chapters that explore the illegal mining in Lombok, and how you approach the story from the struggles these miners have to endure each day with the toxic substance they use to purify gold. But I would want to know, I believe in the book, radicals, religious fundamentalisms, religious radicalisms, terrorisms, and environmental degradations were some of the big issues facing Indonesia that become your main concern in the book. What is your prognosis of the country?
Going forward for it? Right. Well, I think it's very difficult for the country, or for Bali?
For the country first.
Right. Well, I think everything's so uncertain at the moment, and I think that it's clear that the president needs to handle the pandemic a lot better, and I think that these religious extremist groups who've had so much power in the last few years, and they seem to be kind of subdued at the moment. But I think if with this turmoil and this instability and the anxiety over jobs and money and survival, I think there could be a resurgence of political violence and extremism. unless he, Jokowi sort of, I mean, he seems to be just completely focused on this infrastructure development and economic, without sort of properly managing the pandemic, which he seems to be a bit all over the place to me. I think that, there's great opportunity for great civil unrest because the situation just seems to be getting worse with the pandemic, doesn't it?
Yeah, true, and it's really terrifying. But you met with I think you one of the journalists, probably the only one who conducted a series of interviews with the wives of the convicted terrorists, and you already embed a message that their children will be radicalized in the future. So do you think religious extremism will be a long haul problem for this country, or a recurring one? Or
well, I think there's two different problems, and I think there's that, and then there's also the opportunity for terrorism to rise up again. And I think all the conditions are ripe for this sort of violence, and people get frustrated, they get angry. That it fuels despair and violence. And I think look, I do think that there's, I just wouldn't be surprised if something big happened there. I mean, I hope it doesn't, but it's all sort of focusing on this pandemic and the conditions that aren't being people are aware that the government is not in control of this, or even it seems to be nothing is working at all. And I mean, look, even from a lot of the health stories that I did, including one of them being the Aids Hiv epidemic in 2010, it was the same thing. It was, in a sense, it was smaller, on a much smaller scale, but it was big at the time, and it was big in Bali. And I a big feature on that, and I found for the really that it was astonishing that there were no stats and there was no information. And in fact, it was this guy, Professor Wirawan, who's just died of COVID.
True.
Now he had he was one of two people who helped me with my story, and in fact provided me with immaculate stats and records, and so it was actually, I found it, and I could hardly believe it when I saw that he'd died of COVID. But terrible. But yeah, that would sort of open my eyes to, along later with many other stories, kind of tragic stories about the lack of priority on health, and including mental health. But and that in my dealings with government officers and the Bali Health Office, they would openly say, look, we don't have any funds and we don't have any records, we don't have any information to give you. And the only way I would be able to get anything would be through private. I would sort of dig around for a good private person like Professor Wirawan, and all, and then there were others with other health stories, and they were always private, privately run. and the public system was absolutely hopeless. They never had any money to be able to do anything.
Well, at least in Bali they speak to you, the official. I recall a detail in your book about you are trying to get an interview in Lombok and they left you waiting for hours.
Oh, that was the governor.
Yeah, the governor.
That was, yes, that was incredibly frustrating, and it was the most, one of the weirdest situations I've ever been in. I think it was bizarre, but in the end, when I did get to see him, he was unbelievably talkative and helpful, and also spoke this perfect English. So I was, it was it was almost nonsensical, the whole thing. And I was, they kind of left me in the blazing sun.
Which take us to Bali now. The pandemic is seen as the last nail in the coffins for these mass tourism models. I mean, in the last few years, there is a growing awareness among not only Balinese intellectual right now, but also people who are working in tourism industry, that this mass tourism model is not working. What are your takes? What are your takes on this, Deborah?
Okay, so well, again, I have to say it's uncertain, and it's, well, first of all, it's uncertain when international borders will reopen, and how that will go when they do, and how the current model can be sustained. As you say, I don't know. I don't believe the answer is for everyone to go back to the rice paddies. For a start, most of them have been swallowed up by development. So the genie is out of the bottle. I think people need to think hard. People in, good academics, good, if there's people that are good in the government, need to think hard about productive, sustainable options, so that they can attain an equitable quality of life, and stop relying on outsiders, stop relying on tourism. I think that's my question to officials during previous disasters, like the volcanic eruption, for instance, and even, after the bombs, but I wasn't there at that time. When tourists deserted the island during previous disasters, I always ask people, don't you think it's time to develop another industry? And I think it would be smart to incentivize a concerted higher education drive. I think Bali desperately needs alternatives to tourism. And I think an inclusive, funded education strategy to sort of reel in a lot of people that live on the fringes as well. But, obviously it's not going to be higher education, but just to encourage jobs outside hospitality, because at the moment that's all everyone wants to do, and it's a worry, because especially because their goal is to go on a cruise boat.
Working on a cruise.
I mean, a lot of these people are very intelligent, and they're just sort of beholden to the tourists, the mighty tourism dollar, and I think I really do think, it's so important to try to develop another industry, obviously, but how do you do that? Well, I think education they have to step up on doing better with education, because I mean, if you go to the remote areas, and I used to go quite a lot into the villages where I saw kids dressed up in uniforms, little kids dressed up in uniforms, and the teachers didn't arrive. And they would arrive at school and then they'd go home again. And I mean, it just was all kind of, and the government would give them these uniforms to make it look like there was some system in place. But, you know, I think there's got to be some sort of strategy to bring, as you say, this you know, to make it more equitable and at least get kids to be learning a proper curriculum. I think that's a start. You know, I mean, I thought about look. There's when I say industries, there's IT. You know, I think Balinese people are quite good at IT. I don't know. There's lots of things. There's just, I found in the university, at the Udayana University, there were certain people I could rely on, but not too many.
and based on your experience with Balinese jam karet and besok, do you think change, I mean, change that we need immediately is possible?
Well, I mean, we've got to think about survival mode now, and I think they I mean, I see the challenges only too well, and I think that is a mentality that, you know, I think the mentality is going to have to change, or else what, are they all going to just really just fade away? And, you know, if the tourists don't come back, I mean, are they at the moment just sort of thinking, well, the tourists will come back and everything will be fine again? I don't think you can do that. But
although many people think that way. Deborah, throughout your years in Indonesia, you have encountered many things and meet individuals that many Indonesian doesn't even know about. Two things that come to my mind is that perverted dukun in Denpasars, the charlatans, and the second one is the existence of the tiny Jewish community that for 2 decades had conducted weekly services in Denpasars. I mean, for me, being a journalist and a Balinese, that's quite surprising. So I want to know, what is the most surprising event or phenomenon that you have encountered in Indonesia, and also the most intriguing persons, individual you have met, not Tommy Winata. Okay.
Okay, you don't want to hear about Tommy.
No.
Well, first of all, I think you're right that when I first came to Bali and Indonesia, I mean wider Indonesia, so this tiny but very robust Jewish community just took me by storm. I thought it was so weird, and you know, it was such an anomaly. I was really overawed that I was in this majority Muslim country celebrating holy Jewish holidays in secret, surrounded by a tropical wonderland inhabited by Hindus. And Judaism, of course, is not a sanctioned religion. And it was very risque, you know, it was sort of, you know, looking over your shoulder. And by the same token, it was kind of marvelous, you know, that this was able to happen. And then, so through that community, I met, you know, this guy who was a Dutch Jewish descendant, and he wore all the robes of a rabbi, and I was fascinated, you know, and I said, why are you wearing all that? And for a start, it would have been very hot. And anyway, I just asked him all about himself, and he invited me to his home in Manado to find out more about how it was there. And actually, how it was there was a total surprise. If you're talking about surprises, that was extremely. There was this sort of this. There's not as many Jewish people there now, because I think a lot of them have gone to Jakarta. And anyway, also I think a lot of them had converted, because of course they years ago, but I think then a lot of them converted back because they found out that it was all right, it was okay. Because when I got there in North Sulawesi, the taxis were all sporting Israeli flags, and there were stars of David everywhere. It was like the celebration of Judaism, and I just thought, oh, this is very strange. And it was in the middle of this majority evangelical Christian community.
Yes.
And they just loved the Jewish thing. And I remember walking into a shop that sold these Judaic items, you know, there's symbols of, and they even had tie-dyed shirts with Hebrew on them. And I asked this woman, you know, why was there all this interest? And she said that they just thought that the Jewish people were also Jesus was a Jew. So it was sort of, they didn't really understand themselves, but they seemed to have great warmth, which was. But there's a synagogue there, and it's just an extremely one of the strangest places I've been to.
And the strangest person?
Sorry?
And the strangest individual?
Okay. Well, the strangest or the most interesting?
Oh, yeah. Can be both, isn't it?
I'll tell you about another strange, if you don't mind, if we've got a strange place that I went to, and in Bogor in West Java. So I reported a story about trafficking and cow contracts, and you know, like short-term marriages between these impoverished girls and refugees, and also between Saudi men, which you know, I didn't know anything about this story, and somebody's kind of tipped me off about it. But the marriages were just Islamic ceremonies, and they weren't. They only lasted until, say, the refugees left for Australia, or the Saudis went back to, you know, they came on holiday. And the area, though, where these Saudis took the girls was one of the weirdest and eerie places I've ever seen. It was, and my assistant, who was from the Jakarta Globe, she couldn't believe it either. So we were just we're driven into this area, which was it was kind of closed, but it was a gated community, like the area of a large suburb in a Western society, and in each street featured a globally themed sort of architecture and landscape, and it was like a giant movie set. And this is where these Saudis would come for a couple of months and take these girls. And so you'd go from the Japanese street with cherry blossoms to a Swiss street with chalets and so forth. But anyway, it was a quite kind of bizarre, but and it was all shuttered. So the girls were bought in a people smuggling ring, and prices varied according to their age and their virginity and their appearance. So, and then they inevitably got pregnant, and then the children were stateless, so because they weren't registered at birth, and the government actually hid this issue. But yeah, that was a very strange. But you wanted to know about some person, not Tommy Winata.
No, I will. We have to cut this short. We run out of time, so
Okay.
I will ask you one last question. I mean, Deborah, you moved to Bali to escape a marital tragedy, but since your relocation, you have suffered so many tragedies in Bali. You've been mowed down by scooters. You've been bitten by a dog during a rabies outbreak. You are being groped by a perverted dukun. You are being diagnosed with breast cancers. You witnessed firsthand a burglar being beaten to pulp by the mob. So in retrospect, do you think your move to Bali is a good decision?
Look, all those things weren't. I mean, first of all, I had a rabies immunization shot when I was bitten by the dog. But look, yes, I actually feel incredibly privileged to have gone on such an amazing journey and had that opportunity to report for a decade. It was really, a dream ride for a journalist, and it sort of gave me an ability to recreate my life and extend myself in my career. And the experiences you mentioned could have been worse. Nothing's all smooth sailing. And but again, I've often found that the darker side of things offers up unique insights and obviously lessons. But yeah, I could have come to greater blows. Look, there are so many things that can go wrong, I know, in a developing country, and I reported on many of those. So so I didn't, in retrospect, I think I was quite lucky to escape as I did. Yeah.
Gods and demons. So where could we get the book? I only got the PDF right now.
So unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem, I think, with Periplus, but the book is published by ABC and HarperCollins, and it's out on ebook. It's Audible books. I narrate it, and also in the paper book. But I think it's a bit hard to get at the moment, but will be certainly available early next year through the distribution from the UK. So it's being published in the UK, and from then on, it will be available in Indonesia. So yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. That will conclude our session, everyone. Deborah Cassrels, Gods and Demons. Kembali, excuse me?
Thank you so much, June.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Deborah. It's pleasures. Everyone's Kembali 20 was made possible with the support of the Yayasan Mudra Swari Saraswati Patron Program and the donors. The Patron Program was created to seek assistance for the survival of both the festival and the foundation. By making a valuable contribution to the Yayasan Patron Program, you will be directly involved in delivering both festivals in due time. Your contribution will guarantee the future of Indonesia's most meaningful cross-cultural platform of words, ideas, cultures, and the creative arts. Thank you, everyone, for joining our session. Thank you, Deborah Cassrels.
Thank you so much.